The wind carried the smell of dust and sweat through the small trading post. It sat between the edge of Apache land and the ragged trails of the white man's frontier. It was late afternoon, and the sun hung low over the horizon, painting the dry hills in red and gold. Horses stood tied to railings, tails flicking at flies, while a group of men huddled near the corral, talking in low voices. Their faces were rough, their hands worn from years of work and fight. Among them stood an Apache named Tahoma, tall and quiet, his sharp eyes hidden under the brim of an old hat that had once belonged to a cavalry scout. Tahoma wasn't there to trade cattle or horses. He came for something different, something he never thought he'd want: a wife. The townsfolk had heard the whispers already. The Apache's buying himself a woman, someone muttered near the saloon door, spitting tobacco into the dust. Others laughed quietly, half curious, half afraid. Few in that part of New Mexico territory ever dared speak to him directly. The man was known for keeping to himself, for living up in the hills after his people had been scattered. They called him the last one who remembers, because he carried the old ways in his silence. The trader, a fat man with a red face named Benton, was grinning like he'd just struck gold. $2, he said, patting the small leather sack on the counter as if it held something precious. That's all, my friend. She ain't much to look at, but she can work, clean, and she won't give you no trouble. Came in with that wagon from back east. Tahoma looked at the woman standing behind Benton. A sack covered her head, tied loose around the neck so she could breathe. Her hands were bound, not tight, but enough to keep her still. She wore a torn dress and old boots, both caked in trail dust. She didn't move or make a sound. Just stood there, small and still like a ghost. Benton chuckled when Tahoma said nothing. You Apaches don't talk much, do ya? Well, maybe that's for the best. This one ain't said a word since she came in. Some say she don't speak English. Some say she don't speak at all. The only sound in the room was the faint creak of the wooden floor. Tahoma reached into his coat and pulled out $2 silver. They clinked against the counter, echoing louder than they should have. Benton's grin widened. Deal's done then, he said. Take her and go before the sheriff comes nosing around. Last thing I need is someone asking questions about where she came from. As Tahoma took hold of the rope that tied her wrists, the woman flinched. Her hands were cold, trembling slightly. He didn't say a word, just led her out of the trading post and toward his horse. People watched in silence. Some smirked, others looked away. Out here, nobody asked what a man did with his money or his conscience. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dirt road. Tahoma helped her onto the horse, then climbed up behind her, holding the reins steady. The trail ahead stretched miles into the open land, dry and endless. He didn't look back at the town. He never did. The ride was long and quiet. The only sounds were the horse's hooves and the soft rattle of the woman's breath beneath the sack. Once or twice, she tried to speak, but the sound came out broken, almost frightened. Tahoma glanced at her but said nothing. He was a man who had learned long ago that words weren't always the way to truth. When they reached the small cabin tucked beneath the red cliffs, the air had turned cool. Smoke from his fire pit rose into the evening sky. He dismounted, then untied her hands gently. She hesitated when he reached for the sack, as if afraid of what might happen next. He paused, his fingers just touching the cloth. Something in the way she stood, the way she breathed, didn't fit the story Benton told. Her posture wasn't that of a servant or a wanderer. It was too steady, too alert. He pulled the sack away slowly. What he saw made him freeze. Her face wasn't what he expected. She was young, but not a child. Her skin was pale beneath layers of dust, her eyes sharp with fear and pride. She met his gaze directly, no hesitation. Her lips parted, and in a soft, trembling voice she whispered, "Please, you have to help me." Tahoma's hand tightened around the sack. He didn't answer. The woman looked over his shoulder, scanning the empty desert as if expecting someone to appear. "They'll come for me," she said, her voice breaking. "They'll kill us both if they find me here." He stepped back slowly, watching her every move. She wasn't lying. He'd seen that kind of terror before, the kind that comes when someone's running from something much bigger than themselves. "What are you running from?" he asked finally. Her eyes darted toward the dark horizon. "A man," she said, "and the ones who work for him. He owns the post, the wagons, everything. I wasn't for sale. I was taken." Ahoma didn't move, didn't speak. The desert around them had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to stop listening. He looked at her, at the bruises on her wrists, the way she kept glancing toward the trail. Something deep in his chest stirred, not pity, but recognition. He'd seen his own people taken and sold. His own world broken apart for someone else's gain. Inside the cabin, the fire flickered low. He motioned for her to sit, handed her a cup of water, and watched as she drank in quick, shaky sips. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "If I tell you, it'll only bring danger." "Danger's already here," he said quietly. She stared into the flames for a long time, then whispered, "They call him Mr. Wade. He's a man who buys and sells people. He killed my brother when we tried to run."
Art.
Her words fell like stones in the quiet room. Tahoma's jaw tightened. He had heard of men like that before, men who built their fortunes off the pain of others, men who hid behind law and trade papers while doing the work of devils. He leaned forward slightly. "Why did Benton sell you for $2? "Because Wade told him to get rid of me," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "He thought no one would take me alive, but you did." Outside, a coyote cried in the distance. The woman flinched, and Tahoma's eyes went to the window. The desert night was deep and black, the kind that could hide anything. "Do they know you're here?" he asked. "Not yet," she said, "but they will." He stood and walked to the door, looking out into the stillness. He could feel the coming storm, not of weather, but of men and bullets. Something about this woman had already tangled his fate with hers, whether he liked it or not. Behind him, she spoke again, her voice faint but steady. "You don't have to help me. Just let me go before they find this place." He turned, his expression unreadable. "You wouldn't make it past sunrise." "I've made it this far," she said. Thomas studied her for a long moment, then walked over to the fire, tossing another log into the flames. Sparks rose up, lighting his face. "Then you'll stay here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, we decide what happens next." She nodded, though fear still shadowed her eyes. Outside, far in the distance, a faint light flickered a lantern, maybe two, moving along the trail from town. Tahoma didn't see it yet, but it was there, weaving through the desert darkness. Coming closer with every passing second, the woman stared toward that light, her breath trembling. "It's him," she whispered. Tahoma looked up sharply. "Who?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely more than a breath. "Wade." And as the fire crackled and the desert wind began to rise, Tahoma knew the $2 silver he'd laid on Benton's counter had just bought him more than a bride. They had bought him a battle he never asked for. The fire burned low through the night, throwing restless shadows across the cabin walls. The wind outside howled against the cliffs, carrying the cry of coyotes and the faint smell of rain drifting from the north. Tahoma sat by the fire, his rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the door. The woman slept fitfully on a pile of blankets near the hearth, her breathing uneven, as if she dreamed of running. Every now and then, she stirred and muttered something he couldn't quite understand. A name, maybe, or a plea whispered to ghosts that only she could see. He hadn't slept since they left the trading post. Something in her story pressed against his thoughts, heavy and unsettled. Men like Benton didn't deal in mercy. If this Mr. Wade had sent word to sell her off, then there was a reason behind it, and it wouldn't be a small one. The kind of man who could buy and sell people had power, the kind that reached across counties, maybe even through lawmen who wore their badges for the highest bidder. By dawn, the storm had passed. Tahoma went outside to feed the horse and check for tracks. The desert was clean and quiet except for the soft patter of water dripping from the rocks. He knelt near the edge of the trail, brushing away the thin layer of mud. There were hoof prints, fresh ones leading toward the ridge. Someone had ridden close during the night, and turned back before reaching the cabin. He didn't need to guess who it was. When he came back inside, the woman was awake. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, but her eyes were clear. She sat up as he entered, clutching the blanket close around her. "They were here, weren't they?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, only set his rifle against the wall and poured a cup of water. "They came close," he said. "Didn't find us." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the cup. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Wade doesn't let anyone leave. Not after what I saw." Tahoma looked at her, his expression steady but curious. "What did you see?" She hesitated, as though even speaking it might bring the past roaring back. "He runs something behind the wagons," she said finally. "Not just trade goods. He moves people, native women, poor settlers, anyone he can trap with debt or fear. He tells them they're going west for work, then sells them in the mining camps." Tahoma's jaw tightened. The fire popped behind him, sending a spark onto the dirt floor. He had seen the same thing happen years ago when his own village was broken apart by soldiers and traders who claimed to be bringing peace. He had watched families scattered, people taken in the name of progress and profit. "Why you?" he asked quietly. "I worked in the house," she said. "I was supposed to clean, serve the guests. But one night, I found his ledgers. I saw the lists, names, prices, routes. When he found out, he locked me in a wagon. He told Benton to get rid of me before I started talking." Tahoma studied her face, trying to see if her story fit. There was truth in her eyes, the kind that hurt to look at. He nodded slowly. "Then we can't stay here long." She looked around the small cabin, her voice shaking. "You'll be in danger because of me. If he finds us, he'll burn this place down." "I lost worse," Tahoma said, his tone calm but final. "If Wade wants to come, he'll find a fight." For a while, silence filled the space between them. The fire hissed softly as it died down to glowing embers. Tahoma moved to the table, pulled a map from the shelf, and spread it out. "There's a canyon west of here," he said. "Old trails lead through it to the mountains. If we ride at sunset, we can reach the pass before anyone catches up." She watched him closely, her voice uncertain. "You're risking your life for someone you just met." He didn't look up. "A long time ago, someone risked theirs for me." Her eyes softened. "Who, my brother?" he said after a pause. "The army took him when they came to our camp. He helped me escape. I never saw him again." For a moment, neither spoke. The past hung heavy between them. Two strangers bound by wounds the world never stopped reopening. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and revealing a land that stretched endless in every direction. By midday, Tahoma packed what little food they had, dried meat, cornmeal, and water skins. The woman helped without being asked. She moved with quiet purpose, her fear replaced by something steadier, though her hands still shook when she tied the saddle straps. "I never thanked you," she said as he tightened the last bundle. "You don't need to," he replied. "I do," she insisted softly. "No one else would have stopped. No one would have paid anything for me." Tahoma paused, then gave a faint nod. "I didn't buy you," he said. "I bought time." As the sun began to fall, they mounted up and headed toward the western ridge. The air was cool, the light turning orange and gold. Every shadow on the horizon made her glance over her shoulder, but Tahoma kept his gaze forward, watching for signs of movement. The land was open, and danger could come from miles away. They rode in silence for hours, stopping only when the horse grew tired. As the stars began to appear, Tahoma pointed toward a cluster of rocks ahead. "We'll camp there," he said. "It's safer than open ground." The woman dismounted carefully, stretching her legs. The desert night had grown cold, and she wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "Do you think they're still following us?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, "but they'll wait until daylight. Men like Wade don't travel the dark unless they're desperate." He built a small fire, the flames low and hidden behind the rocks. The smell of smoke rose faintly into the night air. She sat across from him, the firelight flickering over her face. When this is over, she said quietly, what will you do? I don't plan that far, he answered. I live by what's in front of me. She smiled faintly, though her eyes were tired. Then you must be good at surviving, he met her gaze. I've had practice. She stared into the fire, her voice softening. I used to think life was about finding safety, but now I see it's about finding people who don't turn away. Atoma said nothing, but the firelight reflected in his eyes, and for a moment, the silence between them felt less heavy. Yet even in that small peace, he could feel something watching. The desert had a way of carrying whispers, sounds that didn't belong. A faint glimmer appeared on the far ridge, then another, lanterns, moving slow, steady, too deliberate to be travelers. He stood, motioning for her to stay quiet. They're close, he said. She turned pale, clutching the blanket around her. What do we do? Hide the fire, he said, grabbing a handful of sand to smother the flames. The night swallowed them in darkness. He listened, the distant thud of hooves, the faint echo of men's voices carried on the wind. They weren't far now. He crouched near her, his voice low. We move when they pass. Stay behind me and don't make a sound, she nodded, though fear had frozen her breath. They waited, hearts pounding, as the riders came nearer. Through the darkness, the faint outline of 3 men appeared, their horses moving slow, scanning the land. One of them held up a lantern, casting long beams of light across the rocks. Toma held his breath, pressing her closer into the shadow. The riders stopped just yards away, the glow of the lantern almost reaching them. He could hear one of the men speak, a rough voice that carried 2 easily. Wade says she's with the Apache. If we find her, he wants them both alive. For now, the other man laughed under his breath. Ain't much left alive once Wade gets what he wants. The horses shifted, snorting against the cool wind. Then, after a long pause, the men turned and rode off toward the south. Tahoma waited until the sound faded completely before he stood again. They'll come back, she whispered. I know, he said. That's why we keep moving. They packed their things in silence and led the horse along the canyon path. Moving through the narrow gorge where the moonlight barely touched the stone, every step echoed like a warning. The air smelled of rain and dust, thick and heavy. By dawn, they reached a small stream cutting through the valley. Tahoma knelt beside it, filling the canteens. The woman sat nearby, her face pale from exhaustion. I can't keep running forever, she said quietly. You won't have to, he replied. She looked at him, her voice trembling. What if we don't make it? Tahoma turned to her, his tone firm but calm. Then we fight. Her eyes searched his, and something passed between them, a mix of fear and trust. 2 people caught between survival and fate. The morning sun rose slowly over the cliffs, lighting the valley in a soft golden glow. For a brief moment, the land looked peaceful again, untouched by the men who hunted them, but far behind them. At the edge of the desert trail, Wade's riders had found the tracks they left behind. A tall man dismounted, picking up a broken twig where their horse had passed. He smiled coldly beneath his hat. They're heading for the mountains, he said. Don't stop till you find them. And as the riders mounted again, the sound of hooves began to roll across the land, steady and relentless. Following the trail that led straight toward the canyon, the morning sun rose higher, spreading light across the valley like a quiet warning. Tahoma led the horse through shallow water, brushing away the tracks they left behind. The woman followed close, her skirt torn from thorns, her hands scratched but steady. She hadn't spoken much since dawn, her eyes shifting often toward the ridges above them. Every sound made her flinch: a hawk's cry, a falling stone, the wind hissing through dry brush. Tahoma knew she was listening for men. The kind of men who didn't stop until they finished what they started. They moved until the stream bent north and disappeared into a narrow pass. The rocks here rose like teeth, sharp and red, with little space to ride through. Tahoma stopped, scanning the land. We'll rest up there, he said, pointing to a flat ledge above. They'll lose the trail for a while. By the time they climbed up, the heat was strong enough to sting. The woman sank down on the rock, breathing hard. How far can they be? She asked. Close, he said. too close. She pulled her shawl tighter and stared down the trail. I used to believe there were laws out here, that men like Wade had limits, but there aren't any, are there? Tahoma shook his head. Out here, law follows power. Her voice grew faint. Then what's the point of running? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the edge and crouched low. From up there, he could see dust rising in the far distance, a faint moving cloud that didn't belong to the wind. He watched for a long while before turning back. They found the trail again, he said. Her face went pale. Then we don't have much time. They waited until the sun began to fall before moving again. The desert stretched endlessly west, full of quiet places where a man could vanish, but also where death could wait in silence. As they rode through the canyon, shadows grew longer, swallowing the land in cool blue. Tahoma guided the horse carefully, every step calculated, every turn checked twice. The woman held on tightly, her breath against his back uneven but controlled. Hours passed before they reached the edge of the canyon where the ground flattened into scrubland. A single cottonwood tree stood there beside a spring, its leaves whispering in the breeze. Tahoma stopped, listening again. The land was too quiet. We'll camp here for a short while, he said. She slid down from the horse, rubbing her wrists. You think they'll catch up tonight? If they ride hard, maybe, he replied. But if we stay low and don't light a fire, they might pass us, she nodded, sitting near the water's edge. The reflection of the sky trembled in the shallow pool. Tahoma filled their canteens again and knelt beside her. You should eat, he said, handing her a strip of dried meat. She took it but didn't eat. Wade wasn't always like that, she said quietly. When I first worked for him, I thought he was fair. He helped people who owed money, gave them work. That's how he gets them. He looks like a man doing good. By the time they realize what he is, it's too late. Tahoma looked at her, his brow furrowed. You sound like you knew him well. I did, she said, her voice heavy. He was a friend of my father. After my family lost our land, Wade took me in. He said I could work off the debt. I believed him. But I learned too late that no one ever works their debt off with him. He makes sure of it. The wind rustled through the cottonwood leaves. Tahoma said nothing, but his hands tightened around the edge of the water flask. He'd seen men like Wade before him, men who hid their cruelty behind contracts and papers, claiming to bring order while feeding on misery. As night settled, they hid beneath the tree's shadow, trying to rest. The woman drifted into uneasy sleep, her hand clutching the small pouch she carried tied to her waist. Tahoma sat awake again, rifle across his lap, eyes on the horizon. Somewhere beyond the dark hills, faint lights flickered. He moved silently through the brush, climbing a small ridge. The lights were closer now, 4 of them, moving slow and steady. He could hear faint voices carried by the wind. Spread out, one man said. He's close. Tahoma ducked low and slid back down, his boots silent against the dirt. He reached the camp just as she woke. They're here, he said. We have to move now. She rose quickly, fear flashing across her face. Where? Into the rocks. There's an old mine a mile west. It'll give us cover. They gathered their things and mounted the horse again. The land grew darker as clouds covered the moon. The only light came from the lanterns behind them, weaving slowly through the desert like ghost fires. The horse moved fast, despite the weight, its hooves muffled by sand and stone. The woman looked back once, then turned away. They're gaining, she said. They won't, if the horse holds, Tahoma replied. Urging it faster, they reached the mine entrance just before dawn. The old structure leaned against the rock, half buried in dust. Inside, it was cool and silent, the air thick with the smell of old wood and metal. They dismounted and led the horse inside, tying it near a support beam. Tahoma lit a small lantern, shielding the glow with his hand. This will do, he said. The woman sank down beside a pile of old crates. Her face was pale with exhaustion. Do you think they'll look here? Eventually, he said, but not right away. They'll think we kept going. She watched him set down his rifle and check the chambers. You've done this before? She said quietly. He looked at her. What makes you think that? The way you move. The way you listen. He hesitated, then gave a slight nod. There were raids years ago. I learned to listen or die. The woman's eyes softened. You lost people, didn't you? Everyone, he said. Silence hung heavy between them. Then she reached into her pouch and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and creased. This is why he wants me dead, she whispered. Toma took it and unfolded it carefully. Inside were names columns of them each, followed by a number. At the bottom was Wade's signature. These are the people he sold, he asked. Yes, she said, and some of the men who bought them. Judges, officers, traders. It's all there. He looked at the paper again, his expression hardening. If this gets out, he loses everything. That's why he won't stop, she said, before he could respond. A faint sound echoed from outside a horse's neigh, then a low whistle. Tahoma blew out the lantern at once. They both froze, listening. Voices drifted through the air, muffled but close. She came this way, a man said. Tracks lead right here, another voice followed. Then check the mine. The woman's hand clutched Tahoma's arm. He motioned for her to stay still, then moved quietly toward the entrance, crouching low. Through the narrow crack of light, he saw two men dismounting. One carried a lantern, the other a rifle. They stepped closer, boots crunching against gravel. Tahoma waited, every muscle still. The men stopped, just outside, peering into the darkness. Looks empty, one said. Check anyway, the other replied. Tahoma shifted silently, hand on his knife. The first man took a step forward, raising the lantern higher. The light spilled into the mine, catching dust in the air. He squinted, stepping deeper. Just then, a sharp whistle echoed from the distance. Over here, someone shouted. Tracks go west. The men turned quickly, running back to their horses. Within seconds, the sound of hooves faded into the night. Tahoma exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. The woman's shoulders slumped in relief. They're gone? She asked. For now, he said. He walked to the entrance and looked out at the growing light of dawn. The air was heavy with dust, but for the first time, there was a hint of blue sky. He turned back to her. We can't keep running. We need a plan. She nodded weakly. If we can reach Fort Mason, the commander there might listen. He's one of the few who doesn't deal with Wade. That's 2 days' ride, Tahoma said. And they'll be watching the road. Then we take the old route through the hills, she said. It's dangerous, but faster. He studied her face, then nodded. We'll move at sunset. The woman leaned back against the wall, exhaustion finally winning. You think we'll make it? Tahoma looked at the paper again, the names fading under the lantern's faint light. We have to, he said. For them, outside, the desert stretched endless and unforgiving. In the far distance, Wade's men regrouped, their leader sitting tall on a black horse. His expression was calm, his eyes cold. He turned toward the canyons and raised his hand. Find them before nightfall, he said, and bring me the paper. The riders scattered across the plain, dust rising behind them like a storm. Back in the mine, the woman stirred in her uneasy sleep, while Tahoma stood guard at the mouth of the cave. Watching the horizon, the sun burned bright over the cliffs, lighting a world that was still wild, still cruel, and still waiting to test them both. The desert night came heavy and cold. Wrapping the land in a silence that pressed against every breath, the mine was still, save for the soft creak of the beams and the slow drip of water from the ceiling. Tahoma sat near the entrance, rifle in hand, watching the horizon fade into black. The woman slept a short distance away, her head resting against the saddle, one hand clutching the folded paper she refused to let go of. He could tell she hadn't really slept at all. Every time the wind moved, she stirred, as if expecting someone to walk through the door. He kept his eyes on the stars, counting the slow hours. Somewhere out there, Wade's riders were spreading across the desert like wolves on a scent. He knew they wouldn't stop. Men like that never did. The paper she carried was worth more than gold to Wade. It could destroy the empire he'd built in shadow, by the time dawn broke. Tahoma had already saddled the horse and packed their few supplies. The woman rose quietly, her movements careful. Her face looked thinner now, her eyes sharper, as though fear had burned away everything soft. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. "Didn't need to," he replied. "We move now before they circle back." The first rays of sun poured through the mine entrance, lighting up dust motes that floated like smoke. She brushed the dirt from her skirt and tied her hair back. "How far to Fort Mason?" "2 days, if the horse holds," Tahoma said. "1, if we don't stop." She gave a faint nod. "Then we don't stop." They left the mine in silence, the land stretching open before them. The trail wound through dry brush and loose stone, leading west toward the mountains. The air was clear and cool, carrying the faint smell of sage. But beneath that peace was something else, a tension that lived in the quiet. By midday, the sun burned high. Heat shimmered off the rocks, making the world look like it was breathing. Tahoma stopped at a ridge to scan the land behind them. At first he saw nothing. Then, far in the distance, he caught a faint flash of light, sunlight glinting off metal. He watched it for a long moment before turning to her. "They're closer than I thought." Her breath caught. "How many?" "Maybe 6, he said. "Maybe more." She swallowed hard. "We'll never outrun them." Tahoma's eyes narrowed. "We don't have to. Just outthink them." He guided the horse off the main trail, leading them through rough terrain where boulders broke the line of sight. They moved slowly, careful not to leave clear tracks. The woman followed his lead, her face set in determination despite the fear in her eyes. The day dragged on, the air thick with dust and heat. Every few miles, Tahoma stopped to listen, crouching low to feel the ground for vibration. Twice, he caught at the faint tremor of hooves. The riders were closing in. As the sun began to set, the mountains rose ahead, tall and jagged against the fading light. "We'll camp there," Tahoma said, pointing to a narrow ravine cut between 2 cliffs. "It's the only place we can hide for the night." The woman didn't argue. Her body swayed with exhaustion, and when they finally reached the ravine, she nearly fell from the saddle. Tahoma caught her before she hit the ground. "You have to stay awake," he said. "I'm trying," she whispered, forcing her eyes open. "Just tell me, we'll make it." "We will," he said, though his voice carried a weight that made the promise sound fragile. Inside the ravine, they found an overhang that offered shelter from the wind. Tahoma gathered dry brush and started a small, smokeless fire. The woman sat close to it, rubbing her hands together for warmth. "What will you do if we get to the fort?" she asked quietly. "Give them the paper," he said. "Let the soldiers deal with Wade. And after?" He looked at her across the fire. "After, it doesn't matter." Her eyes lingered on him for a moment. "It matters to me," he didn't answer. The flames flickered between them, throwing shifting light across their faces. For a brief second, he saw something in her expression, a mix of gratitude and sorrow. Before he could speak, a sound broke through the quiet. A horse. Then another. Tahoma moved quickly, dousing the fire with sand. The woman froze, her eyes wide. Voices echoed faintly through the canyon walls, getting closer. He motioned for her to stay low, then crept toward the edge of the ravine. Rifle ready. The riders were closer now, their silhouettes dark against the moonlit sand. He counted 5 of them, moving slowly, scanning the rocks with lanterns. "Spread out," one of them called. "They're near. I can smell the smoke." Tahoma's pulse steadied. He raised the rifle, but didn't fire. Yet. If he shot one, the others would swarm them. They needed to move unseen. He turned back and whispered, "We climb." The woman's eyes went to the cliff wall beside them. It was steep and jagged, but there were enough footholds to make it possible. "I can't," she said, voice shaking. "You can," he said. "It's the only way," she nodded, swallowing her fear. He helped her start the climb, his hand steady at her back. Rocks shifted underfoot, sending small cascades of dust down the slope. One of the riders below paused, looking up. "You hear that?" he said. Another man raised his lantern, casting a pale beam across the wall. The light came dangerously close to catching them. Tahoma pressed himself flat against the rock, pulling her close until the light passed. His heart pounded so loud he could feel it in his ears. When the men moved on, they kept climbing, slow and silent, until they reached a ledge halfway up. From there, they could see the riders moving below, unaware. The woman leaned against the wall, trembling. "How much longer can we do this?" "As long as we have to," Tahoma said. They stayed there until the riders vanished into the dark. When it was safe, they climbed back down and led the horse through the upper pass. The night stretched on, endless and heavy, but neither spoke again, till the first light of morning touched the peaks. The woman was barely standing when they reached a ridge, overlooking the plains below. In the distance, she could see the faint outline of a flag rising above a cluster of buildings. "Fort Mason," she breathed. "We're close." Tahoma looked at the fort, then back toward the horizon. The dust was rising again, this time faster. The riders were almost upon them. "They'll catch us before we get there," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "Not if we draw them away," Tahoma replied. She turned sharply. "You mean you'll draw them away?" He didn't deny it. "If I take the horse and lead them into the canyon, they'll follow. You can reach the fort on foot," her eyes filled with disbelief. "You'll never outrun them alone." "I don't need to outrun them," he said quietly. "Just keep them looking the wrong way." She shook her head, stepping closer. "No, you're not dying for me." He looked at her, calm and steady. "I'm not dying. I'm making sure the right people live." Before she could answer, the wind carried the sound of hooves again, closer now, pounding like thunder. The woman grabbed his arm. "If you go, I go too." Tahoma hesitated, torn between reason and something deeper that had grown in the quiet hours they'd shared. "If we both go, no one makes it," he said. She looked at him, eyes shining with fear and anger. "Then give me the paper. If they catch you, it'll be lost." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. She tucked the paper safely into her dress, her hands trembling. "Promise me you'll come back," she said. He gave a faint smile. "If the wind allows it." Before he could mount, the first shots echoed through the valley. Dust flew up near their feet. The riders were in sight now, guns flashing in the rising sun. Tahoma swung into the saddle and turned the horse sharply. "Run west," he shouted. "Don't stop till you see the gate." She hesitated only a second before turning and sprinting down the ridge, vanishing into the scrub. Tahoma kicked the horse hard, charging toward the canyon. Bullets whined past him, one grazing his arm. He didn't slow. The riders followed, shouting curses that echoed off the stone walls. The canyon narrowed, forcing them into a line. Tahoma rode low, steering the horse through sharp turns, kicking up clouds of dust. He fired once, dropping the man closest behind him. Another shot cracked the air, missing his head by inches. The noise of the chase filled the canyon gunfire hooves, the sharp ring of ricocheted bullets. Up ahead, a path split in two. He pulled the horse toward the left fork, vanishing behind a wall of red stone. The men behind him followed, not noticing that the right path led toward a dead end. Tahoma dismounted quietly and led the horse deeper into the rocks, hiding it behind a ridge. He crouched low, waiting. The riders thundered past, shouting to one another as they chased shadows. He could hear their voices fade into the distance, swallowed by the canyon's echo. For a moment, everything went still again. He leaned against the rock, breathing hard, blood from his arm soaking through his sleeve. In the distance, faintly, he thought he heard something else, the sound of a bugle, carried by the wind. The fort was awake, but the calm didn't last. A sharp click echoed behind him. Tahoma turned slowly to see a figure stepping out from the shadows, revolver raised. It wasn't one of the riders, it was Wade himself, tall and cold-eyed. His coat still covered in trail dust. "You've caused me trouble, Apache," Wade said, his voice steady. "And you've taken something that doesn't belong to you." Tahoma didn't move, his rifle just out of reach. Wade smiled faintly. "The girl's heading for the fort, isn't she? Brave, but foolish. They'll never believe her without proof." "She has all the proof she needs," Tahoma said. Wade's smile hardened. "Then I guess I'll just have to make sure she never reaches it." The two men stared at each other across the narrow stretch of ground, the sun burning low behind them. The desert wind rose, carrying the scent of dust and danger. Both men knew what would come next. Neither was backing down, and as the shadow of the canyon swallowed them, the sound of a single gun cocking broke the silence, setting the stage for the final reckoning yet to come. The air in the canyon hung thick with dust and tension. Wade's revolver was steady, his finger tight on the trigger, eyes burning with the kind of hatred that had no words. Tahoma didn't flinch. He stood with his shoulders squared, gaze fixed on the man who'd hunted them across the desert. The light from the rising sun fell across Wade's face, catching the hard lines of greed and fear that had built his whole life. "You don't have to do this," Tahoma said evenly. "It's over. The fort's awake. They'll come." Wade gave a low, bitter laugh. "You really think they'll believe some runaway and an Apache? No one will listen to you. I've bought half the officers there." Tahoma's eyes narrowed. "Then you've already lost more than you think." For a long second, neither moved. The sound of the wind against the canyon walls filled the space between them. Then Wade raised his gun higher, his jaw tightening. "You should have kept your head down. You had a chance to disappear, but you thought you could change something that's already broken." "I wasn't trying to change the world," Tahoma said softly. "Just one wrong in it." Wade fired. The shot tore through the air, echoing across the stone. Dust flew up behind Tahoma as he dove sideways, grabbing his rifle. He hit the ground hard, rolled, and fired back. The crack of his rifle split the morning stillness. Wade stumbled, clutching his shoulder, the revolver dropping from his hand. The canyon went silent again, except for the wind. Tahoma stood slowly, breathing hard, rifle still raised. Wade's face twisted with pain, but there was still a flicker of defiance in his eyes. "You'll hang for this," he hissed. "No," Tahoma said quietly, lowering the rifle. "I'll let the truth hang you." He turned away, leaving Wade slumped against the rock. The man muttered something under his breath, but the wind carried it away. Tahoma climbed back toward his horse, clutching his bleeding arm. Every step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the ridge, he saw the faint line of riders in the distance, soldiers from the fort, their flag catching the light. And just ahead of them, he spotted her. She was on foot, her dress torn, her face pale from exhaustion, but she was still moving, still fighting to reach help. Relief swept through him, so sudden it almost knocked the breath from his chest. He mounted the horse and rode down toward her. She turned at the sound of hooves, her eyes widening when she saw him. "You made it," she gasped. "Barely," he said with a faint smile. I didn't stop running," she said, trying to catch her breath. "When the soldiers saw me, they didn't believe me at first. But I had the paper. They're coming for him." Tahoma nodded, looking back toward the canyon. The soldiers were spreading out now, some heading toward the sound of gunfire. "Then it's over," he said. She looked at him quietly. "Is it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he helped her onto the horse and guided it toward the fort. The land stretched open again, sunlight spilling over the plains. The storm of dust behind them began to fade, leaving only the wind and the long road ahead. By the time they reached the fort gates, soldiers were already riding out to investigate. The officer in charge, a gray-haired man with a weathered face, met them outside. He listened carefully as she explained everything: how Wade had bought the land rights through lies and blood, how he'd used her to hide the evidence. When she handed over the paper, the officer's expression darkened. "We've been looking for proof of this for months," he said. "You've done this territory a service." She glanced at Tahoma. "He's the one who risked everything." The officer gave Tahoma a long look, then nodded respectfully. "You'll both be safe here. Wade won't trouble anyone again." They stayed in the fort for several days while the soldiers rode out to capture Wade and his men. When the report came back, the officer said Wade had been found near the canyon, alive but broken. He would stand trial for his crimes. Tahoma said nothing when he heard it. There was no victory in his eyes, only a quiet tiredness. That evening, he sat outside the barracks, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The woman joined him, carrying 2 cups of water. "You should rest," she said softly. The doctor said your arm needs time. He took the cup, but didn't drink right away. Time doesn't fix everything, he said. She sat beside him. Maybe not. But it gives you the chance to start again. He looked at her then. Really looked. Her face was still drawn from the journey, but there was strength there now, a kind that hadn't been before. What will you do when they let you go? He asked. She smiled faintly. I haven't thought that far. Maybe I'll head east. Maybe find a place where people don't look over their shoulders. You could, he said. You've earned that peace. She tilted her head. And you? What happens to you when this is done? Tahoma watched the horizon, the sky deepening into shades of gold and purple. My people are gone, he said quietly. What's left of them is scattered. I'll go where the wind takes me. There was a long pause between them. Then she reached over, touching his uninjured hand. You don't have to keep running, you know. He didn't pull away. Maybe not. But I don't know how to stop. The wind carried the faint sounds of the fort, the clatter of boots, the low murmur of soldiers preparing for night. Somewhere, a coyote called out, its cry echoing across the open land. It felt like a sound from another world, one that didn't care about borders or gold or war. When the stars came out, she spoke again, her voice soft but sure. You could come with me, she said. Where I'm going, no one will care what name you carry or what blood you have. You'd just be a man who helped someone find their life again. Tahoma looked at her for a long moment. Maybe, he said, but the desert still has things left to say to me. She smiled sadly. Then promise me one thing, listen when it speaks. He gave a small nod. Always. The next morning, when the fort stirred awake, she was waiting at the gate, a small bag slung over her shoulder. She turned when she heard the hoofbeats. Tahoma sat on his horse, dressed in a clean shirt the soldiers had given him, the rifle tied across his saddle. You're leaving, she said quietly. He nodded. The land doesn't hold still long enough for me to stay. She stepped closer, looking up at him. I'll never forget you. Then don't, he said simply. But don't let remembering stop you from living. She smiled faintly. You sound like a man who's said goodbye too many times. Maybe I am, he said. But this one feels different. He reached into his saddlebag and took out a small leather charm circle woven with strands of horsehair and beads. Keep this, he said. For luck. She took it carefully, her fingers brushing his. And you? What will keep you safe? The wind, he said with a faint smile. It's been following me this long. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was full, but not heavy. Finally, he tipped his hat and turned the horse toward the open plains. The sun was already rising, painting the sky in soft orange light. She watched him ride until he became a small shape against the horizon, then gone. As she stood there, the wind shifted, carrying the dry, warm scent of the desert. She closed her eyes and breathed it in, feeling something lift from her chest. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. Weeks later, stories spread across the territory about how a rancher named Wade had been brought down by his own greed. How an Apache and a mysterious woman had crossed the desert to deliver justice. Some said they were still seen together in small towns along the frontier. Others claimed he vanished into the mountains alone. The truth, like the desert wind, was never still long enough to catch. But sometimes, at night, when the stars hung low and the air was still, travelers said they heard the sound of a horse moving steady across the sand and a voice carried on the wind, humming an old Apache tune that spoke of loss, of freedom, and of a heart that never truly belonged anywhere but beneath the wide American sky. And in that song, there was peace, not the kind bought with gold or power, but the kind that comes from knowing you did what was right, even when it cost you everything. It was a story as old as the land itself, a story of redemption, courage, and the quiet strength of those who walked away from the world's noise to find their own kind of truth. Somewhere beyond the canyon, where the sun burned bright against the red earth, a lone rider disappeared into the horizon, leaving behind nothing but tracks that the wind would soon erase. But his story, like the desert, like the woman he saved, would live on, whispered in the dry wind, carried from one campfire to another, as a reminder that sometimes, even in the hardest places, goodness can still take root and grow.